Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com. Hey, Jingjin. So good to have you on the show.
Good afternoon, Jeremy. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm really excited not only to hear your journey as a founder, but also because you're tackling a relatively taboo subject in Southeast Asia, which is really about female and sexual well-being, which is even hard for me to say out loud sometimes because I'm just like, okay, what's the right set of words to use without seeming too awkward? Just by me pausing, it made it even more awkward. So that's a great start to this podcast.
Normally, people get very excited, actually, when they hear anything about SEX. It's such a taboo space, but such a curious space as well. So this is actually a podcast conversation where you should have a glass of wine beside you and to loosen a bit the awkwardness.
Yeah, so we'll talk about it for sure. So for those who don't know you yet, how would you introduce yourself professionally?
Okay, so my name is Jingjin, and professionally, I am the CEO as Chief Everything Officer for the company ZaZaZu. So the personalized sexual wellness hub in Asia that synchronizes education, curation of products, and the engaged female community to help women to own our sexual well-being.
Awesome. And, I love what you said, Chief Everything Officer, which is the honest truth of what it means to be the founder for any startup in the early stages. So when you say Chief Everything Officer, what is the everything encompass right now at ZaZaZu?
Today is actually a great example. It encompasses really from pitching in front of investors, getting the money to make sure that there are enough funds in the company towards to order fulfillment as today, getting the product, making customer service online and packing the orders, sending it to customers, and occasionally have a social media engagement with influencers, really the broad range. I think if you think about a corporation, it would be all kind of functions you could imagine, from purchasing to investor relationship to sales and marketing. That's everything.
Yeah, that's what I miss about working at a big company is like for every one thing, someone else can handle it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You just do your thing, right? So what's interesting about you is that, before we go into ZaZaZu and talk a little bit about, sexual wellness, you've also been a previous co-founder in Germany and China. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that founding story and how you went about doing it in the early days.
Yeah.
And then obviously we'll move the story a bit further.
Sure. So very often people ask me, especially when you have been a serial entrepreneur, I exited this company just in 2019. We were bought out and people always ask, wow, what actually encouraged you to go down the entrepreneur route and what made you to leave actual corporate life? My true version is that it just happened to me, actually. It's not like I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I grew up in China, went to Germany when I was 16 and chose a sector, a industry that is very male dominated, which is automotive industrial engineering sector. Because I knew as an Asian Chinese woman with a background, with speaking 3 languages and with all the diversity ongoing, you will actually make a great career in the Western Europe. And I started my career actually in the corporation in Siemens and recognized that how slow a process, very common, nothing new, that corporations generally very slow. But a German corporation is really, really, really slow. So that does not fit to my personality at all. And then there was one time, 3 years down the road, we were in the fair. And there was this Chinese guy, barely understand any English and barely can read words, and came to me say, hey girl, in very bold Chinese, I want to buy these things. Who do I approach? And I was like, okay, this is a big company. And he looked like a farmer. I was very biased. And he turns out to be one of the biggest country manager for a agriculture firm with billions of dollars in China. And they are not in first, second, third tier city. They are in the 17th tiers of city in China where the government doesn't have any influence on. So he actually took, the villages and took the people together and then found a firm to create agriculture tractors and so on, and recognized that he's a self-made man, and recognized they need made in Germany quality, or they need better quality from engine, from supply perspective. And he made all the way without speaking any English and to Germany and attended the fair and to see how can he actually get access. And of course, you can imagine the corporation is not that easy. You have to have minimum order quantity. You have to have account. You have to. And then what occurred to me, then we had a conversation. He said, you know what? Everything what I heard from you is that I am a salesperson. I have tons of money here. You are a big company and you don't want to take me as a client. So what's happening here? And this made me thinking. And then I grabbed my friend at that time who worked for BCG and say, you know what? There are a lot of SME. SME, of course, obviously in China is a different dimension when we talk SME. And there are a lot of this kind of manufacturers and dying to have made in Germany quality. But because their general size is so small and they don't have access because culture barrier, language barrier, many, many barriers. So why don't we find a company and consolidate all of them? This guy obviously had all the access. And then I am the middleman. I know the German market really well. The industry speak the language. And my friend at that time, co-founder, knows everything around finance, business model, and so on. Why don't the three of us sit together and act as a middleman and consolidate all the volumes and become a big customer for the big clients? Yeah, this is how we started. And we made, at that time, if you ask me what is VC, I would think about something with DVD or something. We got a loan from the bank, and at that time, it was back in 2008, things was fairly simple. You get a loan from the bank with a little interest, and you kick it off. Yeah, and then eventually the company became a 5 million euro sales company, and we sold it for 2019. And it was quite a ride.
Wow, what an amazing journey. And there you were building it across Germany and China. And so what brought you to Singapore, and then you started off at the Antler program? So I'm just kind of curious, what brought you to Southeast Asia?
It was indeed, there was two mandates. One of the things that we thought, okay, in China that we have limited reach. At that time, we had 10 employees. We were extremely profitable with this business model, and we couldn't expand further in China. And we thought, why don't we move to Southeast Asia? The hypothesis at that time was, if you look at the SMEs, which country should you look like? Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. So the hypothesis I made at that time, very arrogantly, is that when you speak the same language, the mentality is quite similar, which is completely wrong. So we said, you know what, let's understand the SME landscape here in Singapore. Let's work with the manufacturers. Since we speak the same language, I can introduce made in Germany technology. Let's try to expand in ASEAN. And it has always been my dream to attend a business school, which is INSEAD, and they happen to have a location here as well. So at that time, we were without kids, and I grabbed my husband saying, if not now, when then? Let's go. So that was the time, I think that was a very bold decision. We moved to Singapore, and then I applied for INSEAD, and then start to a part-time MBA program at that time, and then start to understand the landscape in the agriculture tractor sector, and just to realize that the mentality is very different, and people are very, compared to the Chinese farmers, people are rather risk averse because you live a very fairly comfortable life compared to rural area in China. The sales and everything did not work out. We couldn't expand at that time. And very luckily it was, and then one of the biggest client we have in China decided that he want to expand to Germany. And then he obviously acquired us and then saying, yeah, let me get access to Germany.
Awesome. What an amazing ride. So that's how you ended up continuing to found, scale, and of course, move countries at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. What was your time like at INSEAD? I mean, a lot of people have fun there as well. Any good stories from INSEAD?
I think INSEAD is why I chose this school is hugely because it's diversity. It's really, you can meet a doctor. I have classmate as unbusiness related as a doctor to someone from the defense industry here in Singapore, from the military, from the hospital. You have a great broad range of profession and country-wise, function-wise, profession-wise. So I think that diversity will expand your horizon in many, many aspects of life.
So there you are, and you decide that, okay, I want to be a founder again. So So why did you decide to do it again?
I think it sounds, how women always like, oh, because I was so lucky, that's why I had so huge success. We were very lucky. I think that at that time, the three founder of us, each of us could 100% leverage our strengths and capability. This make that company at that time, Asbo, very sufficient. It was less like a roller coaster, rather like, okay, we did the right thing and then we were at the right time. And in Chinese, we say 天时地利人和, right? So it's that all the stars are aligned. And it was a success. So it made, for me, entrepreneur journey was never a hardcore, bumpy roller coaster journey. We had, of course, disappointments and many hurdles, but it has never occurred to me that it could be that hard as this company, for example. So after the company was acquired, middle June 2019, I thought, okay, now you could, at that time, entrepreneurship happened to you. It was not my passion to make agriculture happening, to equip tractors and dealing with farmers. And it was not my passion. And so I was looking really inside, okay, what was your passion if you were to find a second company? I didn't consider my skill set as such. It has always been a very deep passion calling for me to help women to gain innate confidence. I mean, I grew up in China and I was a very odd kid. My parents was not around. People always call me a ugly duckling at that time because when I was a kid, I had very small eyes. My skin was, you can see, very dark for a Chinese, I come from Beijing. And I was actually quite bad bullied when I was a kid. So I was never able to build certain confidence. And then when I moved to Germany, when people could openly talk about many, many things, such like sexual well-being, such like sexuality, such as who you are, and then the individuality was more celebrated than in China. Okay, let's all be good in math, Chinese. So I want to do something that empower women to really build in their confidence. There are many, many women like me. And then when I was in the corporate still, I run actually Aspo at that time in parallel. I was the first female marketing director in the automotive firm when I was running Aspo at the same time. At that time in Germany, different than in Asia, Western Europe, very few percentage of women really make to the senior level or C-suite level, majorly because you simply don't need the money. In Asia, if my parents didn't work, we couldn't feed ourselves, right? And at that time, if the few women who have been there, done that, belong to a very exclusive club at that time in Germany. What occurred to me that even most of the women are better educated than men. They look great. They speak eloquently. Deep, deep inside, when you are in a smaller circle, there are still a very huge insecurity, uncertainty. And this is nothing that you can just, let's make a women business club. Let's, make power poses. Let's make career advices. Let's ask for 10% more salary. None of this superficial narrative would actually help. So it has always been a calling to me, okay, what angle could you potentially target when you build a business that truly empower women to build in their confidence? And then it becomes sexuality. It was I was looking at what kind of aspect, women take care of we discussed so many things about food, about drink, about beauty. We spent so many things on outside, dresses, makeup, and in sexuality, one of the most important physiological needs in human nature, nobody's taking care of that. So then this is how I actually started to dig in a little bit. Okay, how is the potential generally in FemTech, in sex tech? And then just to discover this is such a green field in Asia and the potential, and then such a growing market generally in growing industry globally.
Wow. Thanks for sharing the arc about how you discovered a problem and something that you wanted to tackle. And I think as you saw from the top of the show, there's so many words or phrases. They call it like intimacy, wellness, sexual wellness, femtech, sexual wellness. So there are a lot of different ways to talk about reproductive health, couples wellness. I've seen it as well. So there's a lot of words. I always joke sometimes it's like, education is always called ed tech, right?
Yes.
And then healthcare is just considered like digital health or the health tech, right? And then it comes to sex. And there's like so many words to describe, they were all like, we're just trying not to use the word sex at all. It's just backing away, right?
Yes.
Interesting problem, right? So why is it that people are dancing around the word, dancing around the concept in every circle?
I think culture impact is the biggest reason. At the end of the day, especially when, generally sexual wellness is not only for women, it's also for men. If you just look at the journey when you grow up anywhere in the world, sexual education in school is rather a biology class. So here's the egg, here's the sperm, and there's the baby. And the process as such is generally not taught in school. And in Asia, we have interviewed many schools. Even the teacher feel uncomfortable to talk about it. But eventually, we grow up, and then in the higher education, in university, you meet someone, you will have your first time. So how is the first time look like? For women, especially. For men, it's like you have never learned how to play tennis. Now you have to play in the Profi League. How do you do that? And the first, we have done a quite big interview here in Singapore, understand the landscape, understand how people obtain their knowledge around sex. Because how do you know it? Except Google it, except asking your friends. Most of knowledge for men came from porn, simply from porn. And the other percentage came from their friends. Whereas for women, it's rather I ask my friends, I Googled a little bit, I tried a little bit, and there is no sophisticated education to tell, okay, how do you actually be intimate? How do you make the first step? So at the end of the day, when it comes to the act, he did not know what he was doing. She did not know what she was doing. When the act is done, what's for the man is okay. Now, it's the evolution from turning from a boy to a man. You remember the movie, American Pie? And for women, it's rather, okay, did I get STD? I lose my virginity to this guy, my first time. Did I get pregnant? It was extremely painful, and you left actually with shame. This is actually our very first encounter, human nature, with sex. This shameful experience makes sex a very shameful act generally. And I think this is actually globally quite similar. In Singapore, in Southeast Asia, generally with countries with a colonial, with a Victorian influence, has a bit more stigma compared to communist country like China or Vietnam.
Yeah, that's so true. And, obviously there are two parts to it. One is about how we learn and are educated about it. And second, I think we're starting to talk about some of the gender differences and how they approach this topic. So at least for the first part, you reminded me, and I forgot about this. I was in an all-boys school and we had a human reproduction class in biology, of course. It was the first ever class. And poor teacher, Miss Puan, she came in and started teaching a thing. I was joking. I never said the back right, but I was close to the back right. Because you say the back right, you're a troublemaker. But even close to there, then you get a little less attention. I was cracking a lot of jokes. And then everybody started laughing. I don't remember what it was. I don't think it was very sophisticated jokes, but it was about the eggs. It wasn't crude, but it was just jokes about something.
Right.
And then the whole class kind of lost control. And it was just like all these guys were just laughing and rolling around. And then the poor teacher cried and ran away from the classroom. And then I felt so bad. It was a very funny topic for like a teenage boy.
Teenager, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. It's because we were so uncomfortable about it. So we were joking about it. Anyway, I do remember that, and I apologized to her years down the road, and she remembered,
I think that you make a very good way to make a long-lasting impression when you crack joke about reproductive health this way.
Yeah, I think it was a picture of like the egg and the sperm headed towards it. I can't remember. I wish I could remember what the joke was, but
she will remember it. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, she remembers it, And obviously, I think the second part I talked about is obviously, it's interesting because we're talking about the gender differences. And I think one reason why I was also kind of like struggling with the initial terminology was because when we think about sex tech, for example, it almost feels like there's also two other ways to look at it, which is like the male point of view, or at least the pornography side of it. And then the other part you're talking about is female FemTech or female intimacy. So it's an interesting dynamic where we're talking about sex as an activity, a domain, but also there's a very gendered lens on it, right? And so sometimes you're FemTech, sometimes you're sex tech, right?
Yes.
And those are not exactly the same.
No.
It causes that terminology. So could you tell me more about how the FemTech angle on sexual wellness and intimacy is different from the general world view of what sex tech is?
Right. I think sex tech at the end of it is a sub-subject from FemTech. The bigger term would be FemTech. FemTech, why is there a tech? Is at the end of the day, when women want to run their business but funded by men, they have to add the tech into it so the investor understands There's actually a business behind. So FemTech, at the end of the day, everything around female health, reproductive health. It could be, of course, the focus is rather in reproductive health, but also in breast cancer, for example, healthcare. Generally, everything that specifically women only have. And this is everything around FemTech. And because the history of our medical history is that everywhere around the world, women were not doctor from day one. Women were housewives, it's in the medical area. Women reproductive health, generally women health, female health is very undiscovered. For example, the organ clit. I mean, it's like so funny. We just talk so open about it. It's like sometimes I was passionately talking about clit, about vagina, about all these words. People were like, oh, it could be. So whoever's listening to that, I apologize for that already. But the organ clit, for example, is only discovered in the early 90s. So the function, is there any function? There's no function. And then female pleasure is the only organ actually in the human anatomy that has no other functions but maintain pleasure. I think that generally everything femtech, nowadays, women can be anything, could be CEO, could be housewife, could be time for women to do something has never been better. And then women start to realize that a significant part of their life in terms of health is actually not underdiscovered. So if we can't ask men, which let it be the startup industry, let it be the funding industry, investors, we can't let men dictate the terms because they don't understand our body well. So let's take this matter in our own hands. Especially, for example, let it be menstrual health. This is a very big space. Menstrual health, that every girl goes through that whole life. Menopause, every woman will reach that stage. And how to make your life better today, because we live significantly longer than 30, 40 years ago. So when menopause hits, does not mean that your life is over. You still have 20, 30 years ahead of you. How to make the best out of that time? Or let it be menstrual health. 20% of women couldn't be productive because they suffer monthly from the menstrual pain. So there are great ways to track your menstrual health, to track periods, all these kind of things make actually you more productive. Let it be also for the working force. So femtech has become, I think, meanwhile, sex tech alone, sex tech only focus on sexual well-being, but generally for the reproductive health, let it be breast, let it be everything what women uniquely own would be in the femtech space.
Wow, that's a lot of truth there. So basically, we're talking about how a lot of the female biology has been overlooked, right?
Yes.
Recently discovered. And so we were talking a little bit about it from, obviously the menstrual cycle is a big productivity pain, but also it's underserved as a problem in many countries around the world.
Yeah.
And then, it goes all the way to what you talked about in terms of like sexual wellness for women. But also, I think we talked about reproductive health and childcare and so forth. That will be further down the line, right? That's like very unique to women in terms of the fundamental biology that's kickstarting this process. When you think about all of this, why is it that people don't want to talk about it? I don't know. I mean, for me, it's obviously stigma, right? Even I felt it coming in was like, okay, can we use the word sex versus A, B, C, right? How do we think about why people are uncomfortable talking about it?
I think it's because it's a very private part of our life. I think that generally, of course, social stigma is like, if you look at Maslow demands pyramid, at the bottom is the most physiological needs. It's eating, drinking, sleeping, go to toilet, and sex. And if you look at actually all these kind of aspects, before 20 years ago, when you talk about you have a certain mental issue, my father had suffered actually from depression. 20 years ago, it was, okay, he's sad, that's not a sickness. And whereas today, if you don't have a burnout, you don't have depression, that's kind of uncool. You know what I mean? So in a certain exaggerating way. And this is the same about sex. I mean, we all come from sex, and this is really good question. I mean, we have done a lot of research, and then from different countries, why some countries are more vocal about sex than the others. And at the end of the day, I think this is something that humans fundamentally think it is dirty. And it is very private and or religious device. There has been many, many misconceptions in this space. And we society somehow evolved to where we are now. And I think this is like the best answer I could give. I think the social influence, social stigma has lasted for thousands of years. And it has just evolved the way it has been now. So it's not, I feel like it's a really crappy answer, actually. But I think it's the stigma, if I would have to say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good phrase you said, right? Which is like, we all come from sex, which is true, right? That. And I also remember as a kid going, ew, no, I don't want to know.
Oh, totally. It's so dirty. Somebody's kissing.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, wait, I exist because of this. So, and I think obviously it translates to what you talked about is like, as a result, it's overlooked in the business world and you talked about some of it where, a lot of the decision makers are male. So if they don't understand the problem, then they don't understand the solution. If they don't understand the solution, they can't fund or invest ways for that solution to come to existence to solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
And it's bad, obviously, for women whose reproductive or menstrual needs are not being served for and they don't have a solution. And I guess it's also bad for people because they don't make money because it's a giant problem for half of the world. And they're like, yeah, let's figure out how to target people based on this persona. Let's divide that persona even more and target that sub-persona. And then let's target this tier 2, tier 3 city. But let's forget about 50% of the world, right? So why is it that, at the business world, you just paint the dollar signs for them and then they're like, okay, I get it and let's do it. Why is it that business decision makers aren't really incorporating that into their thinking?
I think you already rightfully said that. The biggest problem is that in the VC world, the decision maker, let it be the LP or let it be the GP, are still men. And you can't relate to a problem that you don't encounter, that you can't feel yourself. Let's talk about erectile dysfunctions. I tell you, half of the men will understand it immediately. It's just because it could be a problem. It could be potentially a problem. It's something that you could think it could occur to me, and then you take my manhood away. I am an entrepreneur in residence in INSEAD, so I coach students and startups and also to help them to scale their business, especially female founder and in the automotive industry. We often sit, with some of the VCs that work with us, angel funds, and then hear pitches. And I often sit in front of women that pitch for FemTech. And very often you see it's both sides. Firstly, men don't understand and women don't speak the right language. I made a LinkedIn post out of it, and a lady who wants to tackle menstrual health, and she has suffered significantly from not eating well, not understand her body well, and 3 to 5 days of her months is she could not even get up, and this towards carried through the pregnancy. So it became a passion, and so she built an app how to track your menstrual health and make your menstrual health more bearable. She started, so we were in the jury, and I was the only woman around 5 men. It's an angel investment round. And she started very passionate, vocal about, don't you just hate these days where you have cramp and you cannot get up out of bed? And I was like, okay, no, they can't. If you would change the angle to your daughter, look at the men. Do they have daughters? Do they have moms? Do they have wives? The pitching angle, this is just very small things, no? That make your problem more relatable to your audience. And at the same time, of course, the men here, in that case, if they don't have daughter, they don't have wife, they could potentially think, yeah, I hear that menstrual health during that month of days, my girlfriend's always in bad mood, but that's it. So in the moment, the dollar sign's already gone because you can't see the dollar. Why should I? My girlfriend would never use another app just to track her menstrual health because she might not have it at all. So I think the biggest problem is that women don't speak the right language yet in the FemTech space, and men cannot relate to the problem that women are pitching.
Yeah, that's a lot of truth there. I think it takes two hands to clap. And this side, you're right to say it's not just an issue for the men who don't really understand. It's also interesting for you to share that. For any group that's outside of the mainstream, right? For any minority, whether it's in this case gender, but also based on nationality or culture, there's also an aspect where you need to build out that bridge, right, of communication and articulate that connection to make it translatable, right?
Yeah.
And I think you did a great job explaining with an example. And I see that all the time. It's not just a FemTech issue. I mean, there's so many founders that you and I both know who pitch, and all the other founders are like, oh, that's quite obviously not the best way to articulate it, right?
Yeah.
Because we're like standing away from the problem. And so we're like, oh, that's unclear. And then after that, I go home and I'm like, okay, maybe this product I have is very clear to me, but is it unclear to other people, right?
Yeah.
And you go off and ask other friends and say, hey, does my pitch sound clear? What advice would you give to women who are looking to tackle FemTech how should they go about learning how to better articulate the problem in a way that's understood by the counterparty?
I say at the end of the day, firstly, I always say most importantly is to speak the language that your audience speak. When I pitch to anyone, I try to understand. I mean, nowadays in Google, social media, your life is an open book. You can easily find out whether they have daughter, they have wife, they have mistress. If you want to tackle a female problem, and then of course, ideally you pitch to a female VC or a female fund or a fund that actually has female representative. I mean, for example, every older investor, let it be Insignia, let it be Sequoia, people who have approached me now are older female GPs in the venture partners in these funds. When I start with the problem statement, they already understand what I'm saying because they are facing the same problem. Whereas I had this occasion with someone was really interested in what I'm doing, and then so let's have a conversation. And I made the mistake, started with the same narrative as well. And he was like, I don't see that as a problem. We have my wife, to be frank, we are very sufficient. We're very good in what we're doing. I don't think that's a problem. So in this way, you already cut the conversation there. And then you obviously with him, you need to have a very complete different angle how he can make it more relatable to him. Generally, I think speaking the language of the audience is extremely crucial. But I think also for women, I coach a lot of women. Most of women, what they do almost always wrong is to undermine their success. I just coached recently someone. She came with a great pitch deck about baby turban, actually. And I coached two founders at that time. One was a guy, came to the session without prepping anything and just say the $1 billion industry he's targeting. And he does not even have an MVP at that time. No? This lady came very humble, thank you extremely about your time, and talk about the baby turban, the market, everything well prepared. And he said, but I don't think I can seek funding. I'm a very small business. We only have $200,000 sales. I almost fainted at that time. I was like, $200,000 sales. You make it sound in the moment you are not even making any dollar sales to me. And this happens to a lot of women, not to proudly and confidently talk about success because they don't know what's success. Because in her head, a big business is $1 billion business, $1 million business, and I am not even halfway there. And I think that's actually speaking the language and don't undermine your pitch. Speak the right language and then be proud what you have been doing. I would say the most important thing for the FemTech industry.
Yeah, I love what you said about firstly being confident and secondly doing the preparation work to know who the other party is. For us, my last company was in early education, and it was very simple that we kind of realized there was a pattern after a while was if you didn't have children, you did not understand the problem, especially if you're a guy.
Yeah.
If you were a female and you didn't have a child yet, you still understood the problem because you knew and heard the stories from other people about childcare availability and so on and so forth. And if you were a parent, a new parent, male or female, you understood the problem instinctively. But what was interesting was that people who were very senior didn't really understand the problem because they grew up in a time when childcare was very cheap and available. And oftentimes their spouse would stay home to take care of the kid.
Right.
So they didn't understand why childcare was even a category to buy, actually.
Took it for granted, right?
Took it for granted, exactly. Took it for granted that someone would stay home. Whereas every millennial who's a parent today kind of knows like that's not possible because everyone's a dual income household. And what's interesting as well was actually if they were millennial parents, but if they were too rich, they wouldn't understand the problem. Because for them, it was like, we can hire a full-time nanny and we can just have a helper 24/7.
Right.
Wouldn't every mother prefer to do this or stay home? And so they forget about this in-between category of people who are frustrated with the current childcare but have to get childcare because they have to work, right? And that's an interesting dynamic. And that was interesting where I was like, okay, now that I know this after pitching hundreds of folks, let's focus on people who have articulated, like you said, on their blogs about parenting challenges or they have a family or things like that. And then they understand the problem, right? Like why is childcare a prerequisite for oftentimes the mother to be able to go back to work and it's a prerequisite for the family to be able to afford things. So definitely understand a lot about that preparation side. Let's talk about the confidence thing a little bit. How did you build the confidence to be this second-time founder, but also a founder in this taboo topic called sexual wellness as well? So you really kind of like disparage power poses and breathing exercises just now. So I clearly know it's not that. But I'm just wondering, like, how do you do? Do you just prep? What are you doing to feel confident and be able to be brave in the articulation of what you're trying to go after?
I think end of the day, I mean, this is not a not a great advice, but it's you fake it until you make it. I'm a firm believer of that. I really have to say that. It's very often, I think we generally have a lot of doubts. Women generally doubt themselves. I mean, just look at the looks, like let it be social media. We have so many pressures, from outside. You need to look good. You need to be the good mom, the good girl in school, the good friend, the good wife. And I think all these kind of things make women generally less vocal. So if you can't demand things, and we just simply didn't grow up like that, and then you somehow have to overcome. And I think in the founder's perspective, what's your best alternative? Unless you can fund the damn thing yourself or find alternative ways of raising money, or you come from a rich daddy family and then get the money there, what's your best alternative? And you have to convey your message. And if you don't even believe in whatever you're doing and can't convey that confidently, nobody's going to fund that. And then your company will die. And then where is this going? So every time before I speak to, I firmly believe in what I'm doing. I think most of the women, come on, what's the point of building something you don't even believe in? Most of the women are not in for the money. They are in for the mission, the passion, the calling. And if you truly believe in that, then you should convey that message. I think a lot of things can be worked on how to convey the message. But the fact that you have to say things confidently, you have to build your confidence before any pitch or before you pitch to anyone, let it be friend, let it be VC, let it be actually anyone, really have the vision where this company should be going. It's never the IPO, but for me, it's like every woman one day can confidently convert their sexual needs to their partners. Encourage our society to explore pleasure, to understand our body well, and feel confident in our skin. I think every time before I go to any pitches, I will repeat where I see my company in the future, how my company going to change the world in that way, and then I will start to pitch. You will always have the numbers. Oh, you don't have a lot of sales. The gross margin is not good. All the bad things are somehow still in the back end. But at the end of the day, especially in early stages, in seed stage kind of founders, it's about you. It's about the vision. It's about how you build a business. I think that's, fake it and you'll make it.
I totally agree with you. And I too also am a big believer in it because, at the end of the day, people are going to evaluate you based on your posture, your behaviors. And if you are able to behave in the way that a confident person does, you will slowly become more confident and you will show that as well. And I'm a big believer in that as well. I think it's interesting because you talk about inconfidence, etc. And I definitely noticed, I would say, like in terms of podcast guest cancellations, obviously people always cancel because they have to reschedule. But so far, interestingly, this is my statistic, only the female guests are the one who are saying like, oh, I don't think I'm good enough for the show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, always email back and I say, well, I'm inviting you because I did my research and I think you definitely should be on the show. Anyway, it is what it is. Yeah.
No, definitely. I think, and that's actually a very fair point. And I think self-rejection, especially for women, is very, it's in everyone's head, self-reject. Oh, let's not approach this VC. We are too small. When Kat said, okay, Jeremy actually would like to, ask to be on the show, I was like, okay. Normally, he only interview founders that have already successfully raised their seed round. They were like, did you actually tell him that we are just in that stage? So even with myself, you self-reject first, and then it's in everywhere. Every woman, I think women very specifically is had, you are just not good enough. But the question is, when are you going to be good enough? And if it's up to women, you will never be good enough to be on any show.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I reached out because I felt like this, I was doing some reflection. I was like, okay, what are the topics that I feel like not really talked about, right? In Southeast Asia and so forth. And I said to myself, well, obviously I've heard about Jingjin. I've heard that she's been an articulate and confident communicator, but also leader. And so I was like, yes, I do normally interview people who have at least raised at least one founder funding so far. But I was like, this is a no-brainer to have a conversation. And thank you so much for taking the time to share this and being brave to share about this topic. I'd love to ask you as we, kind of like wrap up into the last chapter here. You've kind of hinted at a couple of tough times along the way. Could you share with us a time where you faced challenge or obstacle and that you had to choose to be brave?
I think the really very recent event, it's like when you mentioned also before, Kesa and I, we actually met in Antler. At that time, when I have a very good, INSEE and Antler, they are collaborate a lot. I always knew I want to start a business with someone, majorly because the success we had with the previous company. You are the correct, good co-founder, make or break the deals. And that's why I chose to go to Antler, for example. And then I met Cass at that time. Actually, quite unfortunate at the very end of the program. And as much as Antler was very vocal about sexual wellness in a way, they were very convinced there's a big space behind, but they were not confident that we as a team could actually go down that route. Although we made, and then I had a very candid conversation with us and saying, Cass, you don't have a digital marketing background and you are not a web developer either. So you are an all-rounder, but you are not tech or digital marketing. So how are you going to make this business big? And I think that, the many points that they mentioned were fair. And many of the points they mentioned at that time, down to the road today, retrospective, was right. But I think that I was talking to Cass at that time saying, let's make a product market fit, as in, if Antler invests, let's go down the road. If Antler doesn't invest, it already shows that it won't work. And after that, Antler ultimately didn't invest. And we still made the decision to go down that route, knowingly that we do not have the perfect capability to run this business. Many things are missing. Let it be tech development, let it be health issues, let it be digital marketing space. Some of the very essential skill set and capability that are needed to make this business a unicorn, we don't have that actually. But still, where we are today, a year down the road, we have achieved a hell of a lot. And I think at that time, to make the decision to go down that route with Cass, with someone that I'm confidently believing in, that I think that's a decision I never regret and be very brave and very proud of.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jingjin, for sharing about that. And I really appreciate you just really being so open about everything. So starting to wrap things up here, I want to kind of summarize the three big things that I learned from you and I really appreciate. I think the first, of course, was your founder journey as someone who, grew up in China, moved to Germany, started sales, and then figured out that first opportunity and then had that, you described it as a straightforward path to build out a company. After that, leaving and then moving countries and then deciding to set up a new company. So I really appreciate that whole aspect around that professional arc. And I think it's so clear to see you've been so structured and methodical about building out your skill sets, but also the business decisions you've made along the way. So which is super amazing. The second part that I also really enjoyed actually was the view on sexual wellness and FemTech. I personally learned a lot in how you thought about the different aspects in terms of terminology, but not also in terms of the stigma that's associated with it, but also like the gendered differences between how we can look at sexual wellness and also talking more specifically about FemTech, I would say, as a category in its own, about why it's overlooked and the business opportunity that's there. And the third thing that I really enjoyed was zooming in a little bit more about how you're thinking about a problem, about philosophy to it, which is being confident, which is about being outspoken, which is about being able to communicate well and translate that for the other side, which is all great tips, I think, for every founder who's thinking about how to articulate something that's not well understood to something that's more well understood. And I'm very happy that you're bringing out this topic and making sure that people understand it and paving the way for other female and future founders as well. So thank you so much, Jingjin.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, to be so brave and then make this topic really a series of podcasts. And then I think sexual wellness, I take it in meanwhile a little bit for granted because I talk about this all day. But really, like you said, when we started this conversation and you start to say, actually, she's saying the word sex out loud, it's already very comfortable with someone you have even barely met. And then really to be so brave to carry out this podcast and let people to hear about the story of ZaZaZu and why sexual wellness and FemTech is a great space to invest as well. And then just maybe last thing from my side, I should just have recorded what you just said, the summary. And I think every time when I feel less confident and in my roller coaster journey, I'm in the down point, I'm just going to replay that and think, yeah, you're damn awesome. Thank you so much for that.
You are damn awesome.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. Stay well and stay brave.